When the stranger knocked on my door on a Tuesday morning in March 2023, I almost didn't answer. I'm 83 years old, and I don't open my door for people I don't know anymore, not in Miami, not at my age. But something made me look through the peephole, and I saw a man in his 60s standing there holding a manila envelope, and something about the way he stood, something about the nervous way he shifted his weight from foot to foot made me open that door. And when he said the words, "Mrs. Patterson, I have information about your son, Danny," I felt the earth shift beneath my feet. My son, Danny, who disappeared 45 years ago when he was only 17 years old. My son, Danny, who I'd been searching for, praying for, hoping for every single day since August 1978. Good morning, my beautiful souls. My name is Helen Marie Patterson, but everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 83 years old, and I've lived here in Miami, Florida for the past 20 years, though I spent most of my life in Atlanta, Georgia. Today, I'm going to share with you the most painful and the most miraculous story of my life. The story of losing my son and finding him again 45 years later in the most unexpected way. But before I begin, if you're watching this, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Grandma's Touching Stories so you never miss another real story from real grandmothers, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Are you in Florida like me? Maybe New York or Texas? Or are you watching from somewhere else in the world? I love knowing where these stories reach. Now settle in, maybe grab some coffee or tea, because this is going to be a long story, and I promise you, every single word of it is absolutely true. It was August 23rd, 1978, a Wednesday morning. I remember the date like it was yesterday because it's a date that's been burned into my memory for 45 years. We lived in Atlanta back then, in a small house in the Bankhead neighborhood. It wasn't the fanciest area, but it was home. My husband, Robert, worked construction, and I worked part-time at a diner on Marietta Street. We had 3 children. Danny was our oldest at 17, then there was Linda, who was 15, and little Bobby, who was only 10. Danny had just graduated from high school that May and was supposed to start at Georgia State University in September. He'd gotten a partial scholarship, and we were all so proud of him. First one in our family to go to college. That morning started like any other morning. I got up at 5:30 to make breakfast before my shift at the diner. Robert had already left for a job site in Buckhead. The kids were still sleeping, or at least I thought they were. I made eggs and toast and bacon, set the table like I did every morning. At 6:30, I called the kids down for breakfast. Linda came down first, still in her nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Little Bobby came down next, already dressed because he had summer baseball practice. But Danny didn't come down. I called up the stairs again. "Danny, breakfast is getting cold." Nothing. No response. I figured he was still asleep, so I went upstairs to wake him. His bedroom door was closed, which wasn't unusual. Danny was at that age where he wanted his privacy. I knocked first, then opened the door. The bed was made. That struck me as odd right away because Danny never made his bed. His room was always a mess, clothes on the floor, books everywhere. But that morning, the bed was made neatly, like he'd done it with care. And the room was too clean, too empty. I looked around and realized his backpack was gone. His favorite jacket that usually hung on the back of his desk chair was gone. Some of his clothes were missing from the closet. My heart started pounding. I ran to his dresser and opened the drawers, half empty. I looked under his bed where he kept his shoebox of money he'd been saving from his summer job at the Kroger. The shoebox was there, but it was empty. I ran back downstairs, trying not to panic, trying to tell myself there was a reasonable explanation. "Linda," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "did Danny say anything to you about going somewhere today?" She looked up from her breakfast, confused. "No, Mama. I haven't seen him since last night. I searched the house for a note, anything that might explain where he'd gone. Nothing." I called Robert at the job site. He was annoyed at first, thinking I was overreacting, but when I told him about the missing clothes and the empty money box, I heard his voice change. "I'll be right home," he said. By the time Robert got home at 8 o'clock, I'd already called all of Danny's friends I could think of. Nobody had seen him. Nobody knew where he was. Robert went through Danny's room more carefully than I had, looking for clues. He found something I'd missed. Hidden in the back of Danny's closet, behind some shoes, was a brochure for California, Los Angeles specifically. The brochure was for Griffith Observatory and had a picture of the Hollywood sign on the front. "He went to California," Robert said, his voice flat. "He ran away to California." I wanted to believe he was wrong, but in my heart, I knew he was right. Danny had always talked about California. He'd watch those Hollywood movies and talk about sunshine and palm trees and the Pacific Ocean. He'd say things like, "Someday I'm going to live somewhere where it doesn't get cold in winter." I thought it was just teenage dreaming. I never thought he'd actually leave. We called the police. They sent an officer to take a report, a young man who looked barely older than Danny himself. He asked routine questions, took Danny's description, asked if we had a recent photograph. I gave him Danny's senior picture, the one where he's wearing a blue shirt and his hair is combed neat and he's smiling that crooked smile of his. The officer wrote everything down and said they'd keep an eye out, but I could tell from his tone that he didn't think this was a priority. 17-year-old boy runs away from home, probably went to chase some dream, probably he'd come back when he ran out of money. That's what his tone said, even if his words were more polite. The days that followed were the longest of my life. Every time the phone rang, I jumped, hoping it was Danny calling to say he was okay, he was coming home, he was sorry. But the calls were from relatives asking if we'd heard anything, from Danny's friends wanting to know if he'd contacted us, from my supervisor at the diner asking when I'd be back to work. I couldn't go back to work. I couldn't do anything but wait and hope and pray. A week went by, then 2 weeks, then a month. School started in September, and Danny wasn't there to start college like he'd planned. His scholarship was gone, given to someone else. Linda went back to school, but she was different, quieter, scared that maybe she'd be next to disappear. Little Bobby asked me every day if Danny was coming home, and I didn't know what to tell him. Robert went back to work because we needed the money, but I could see it eating him up inside. At night he'd sit in Danny's room in the dark, just sitting there, not saying anything. I did everything I could think of to find him. I called the police in Los Angeles, but they said without a specific address or location, there wasn't much they could do. Thousands of kids ran away to California every year. I called shelters and youth centers. I even hired a private investigator for 3 months until we ran out of money to pay him. He found nothing. Danny had vanished like smoke, and nobody seemed to know where he'd gone. The holidays that year were unbearable. Thanksgiving with an empty chair at the table. Christmas with presents for Danny under the tree that would never be opened. I kept his room exactly as he'd left it. His posters on the walls, his books on the shelves, everything waiting for him to come back. Linda thought I was being morbid, holding on too tight, but I couldn't help it. As long as his room was there, waiting, it meant I believed he was coming back. Months turned into years. 1979 came and went. Then 1980. We kept hoping, kept waiting, but the silence was deafening. The police eventually classified Danny as a runaway, a cold case, unlikely to be solved. The private investigator had given up. Our friends and family, as kind as they were, started suggesting we needed to move on, accept that Danny was gone and might never come back. But how do you move on from your own child? How do you accept that? In 1982, we got a lead. A man called, saying he'd seen Danny working at a gas station in Phoenix, Arizona. We drove there immediately, Robert and me, left Linda and Bobby with my sister, and drove straight through, 18 hours in our old Ford. When we got to the gas station, there was a young man there who looked a little like Danny from a distance. Same height, same build, similar hair. But up close it wasn't him. It wasn't my son. The disappointment almost killed me. We drove home in silence, and that was the day I started to lose hope. Robert took it differently than I did. He became angry, bitter. He blamed Danny for leaving, blamed him for destroying our family. He said things like, "If that boy ever shows his face here again, I'll knock some sense into him." But I knew he didn't mean it. He was just hurt, devastated, covering his pain with anger because it was easier than admitting how much he missed his son. Over the years, there were other leads. A postcard from Denver in 1985 that might have been in Danny's handwriting, but we couldn't be sure. A phone call in 1989 from a woman who said she knew Danny, but when we called her back, the number was disconnected. A sighting in New Orleans in 1992. We chased every lead, but none of them led anywhere. Danny remained missing, a ghost, a question mark, an aching hole in our hearts that never healed. Linda grew up and moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. She got married, had kids of her own, built a life. Bobby became a firefighter in Atlanta, got married, had 2 daughters. They both visited regularly, and we all tried to be a normal family, but there was always that empty space where Danny should have been. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering, we felt his absence like a wound that wouldn't close. Robert died in 2003. Heart attack at 71 years old. The doctor said it was genetic, high cholesterol, too much stress over the years. But I think it was partly a broken heart. He died without ever knowing what happened to his oldest son, without ever getting to say goodbye or, "I'm sorry," or "I love you one more time." We buried him in Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta, and I swear when I looked at that casket, I thought about how Danny didn't even know his father was dead. If he was alive somewhere, he had no idea his daddy was gone. After Robert died, I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Too many memories, too much pain. Linda and Bobby helped me pack up and move to Miami to be closer to Linda's daughter, who lived in Fort Lauderdale. I sold the house on Bankhead, sold most of our furniture, but I kept Danny's things, his clothes, his books, his high school yearbook, his senior picture. I packed them all carefully and brought them with me to Florida. I couldn't let them go. As long as I had his things, I had proof that he'd existed, that he'd been real, that he'd been my son. The years in Miami were quieter. I made some friends in my building, went to church, visited with my granddaughter when I could. But I never stopped thinking about Danny. Every young man I saw on the street who was about the right age, I'd look twice, wondering, could that be him? Would I even recognize him after all these years? He'd be in his 60s now if he was still alive, probably gray-haired like me, probably with wrinkles and a different face than the 17-year-old boy I remembered. Would I know my own son if I saw him? I joined online groups for missing persons. Even in my 70s and 80s, I learned to use the computer, joined Facebook groups and websites dedicated to finding missing people. I posted Danny's information everywhere I could, his picture, his description, the circumstances of his disappearance. Most posts got no responses, but I kept posting anyway. What else could I do? And then, on March 14th, 2023, 45 years after Danny disappeared, that stranger knocked on my door. His name was Michael Chen, and he was 63 years old, a social worker from Los Angeles. He'd been working with homeless populations for 30 years, he told me, as we sat in my living room. Him perched nervously on the edge of my sofa, me in my armchair with my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. "Mrs. Patterson," he said carefully, pulling documents from that manila envelope. "I've been trying to track you down for 6 months. You've moved several times, changed your phone number. But I finally found you because I made a promise to someone, and I needed to keep that promise." "What promise?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Who did you make a promise to?" "To a man named Daniel," he said. "Daniel Patterson. He came to our shelter in Los Angeles in 1992. He was homeless, struggling with addiction, in very bad shape. I worked with him for about 8 years, helped him get clean, helped him find housing, helped him get his life together. We became close. He told me about his life, about where he came from, about the family he'd left behind in Atlanta. My hands started shaking. Is he alive? Is my Danny alive? Where is he? Michael's face fell, and I knew the answer before he said it. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Patterson. Daniel died in 2021, complications from COVID. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks before he passed. The room started spinning. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Danny was dead. My son was dead. He'd been alive all those years, living in Los Angeles like we'd suspected, and now he was gone. Gone before I could see him again, before I could hold him, before I could tell him I loved him and I'd never stopped looking for him. But," Michael continued gently, "before he died, he asked me to find you. He gave me a box of things he wanted you to have, letters he'd written over the years but never sent, photographs, his journals. He wanted you to know his story. He wanted you to understand why he left and what happened to him after. He wanted you to know that he never forgot you, that he thought about you and his father and his siblings every single day." He handed me the envelope. Inside were dozens of photographs. Danny at 19, standing on a beach somewhere, the ocean behind him. Danny at 25, thinner, harder looking, standing in front of what looked like a shelter or clinic. Danny at 40, gray starting to show in his hair, smiling slightly, holding a certificate of some kind. Danny at 55, much older, wearing glasses, looking tired but peaceful. My son, aging through these photographs, living a whole life I'd never been part of. There were letters too, letters addressed to me, to Robert, to Linda and Bobby, all written but never sent. I picked up the first one, dated September 1978, just a month after he'd left. My hands were shaking so badly, Michael offered to read it for me, but I shook my head. I needed to read my son's words myself. "Dear Mama," it started, and I burst into tears at just those 2 words. "I know you're worried about me, and I'm sorry. I'm okay. I'm in Los Angeles like I always wanted to be. I have a job washing dishes at a restaurant, and I'm renting a room with 3 other guys. It's not much, but it's mine. I know you want to know why I left, and I'm trying to figure out how to explain it. The truth is, I felt trapped in Atlanta. I felt like my whole life was already planned out and I didn't have any say in it. College, a job, marriage, kids, the same life Dad had, the same life everyone in our neighborhood had. And I wanted something different. I wanted to see the world, to have adventures, to be someone other than Robert Patterson's son or the kid from Bankhead. I know that sounds selfish, and maybe it is. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. But I couldn't stay. I hope someday you'll understand. I love you, Danny." I read through letter after letter, watching my son's life unfold through his own words. The early letters were hopeful, talking about auditions he went on because he wanted to be an actor, talking about the beach and the sunshine and how different Los Angeles was from Atlanta. But as the years went on, the letters got darker. Letters about losing jobs, about running out of money, about sleeping in his car. Letters about getting involved with drugs because everyone around him was using, and it seemed like the only way to cope with the disappointment of dreams that didn't come true. There was a letter from 1985 that broke my heart. "Dear Mama, I've become the kind of person you warned me about. I'm living on the streets. I'm using drugs. I'm ashamed to even write this down, but I need to tell someone, and I can't tell anyone here because they're all just like me. I thought about calling you 1,000 times, but I can't. I can't hear your voice and know how disappointed you'd be. I can't tell Dad that his son turned out to be a failure and a junkie. It's better if you just keep thinking I'm out here living some great life. At least then you can be proud of the memory of me instead of ashamed of the reality." "He was wrong," I said out loud, looking at Michael through my tears. "I wouldn't have been ashamed. I would have helped him. Why didn't he call? Why didn't he come home?" "Shame is a powerful thing," Michael said quietly. "And addiction makes people believe lies about themselves. Daniel thought he'd gone too far, fallen too low, destroyed any chance of coming back. He thought he'd hurt you too much by leaving, and he'd hurt you even more by coming back as a homeless addict." I kept reading. There were letters from the mid-90s when Danny got into a recovery program with Michael's help. "Dear Mama, I've been clean for 6 months. I'm living in a halfway house and working at a community garden. I'm trying to rebuild my life piece by piece. Michael, my counselor, says I should reach out to my family, but I'm scared. It's been so long. You probably think I'm dead. Maybe it's better that way. Maybe it's too late to come back." "It wasn't too late," I whispered. "It was never too late." The later letters showed a Danny who was stable, who had his own apartment, who worked as a peer counselor helping other people in recovery. He'd built a life, not the life he'd dreamed of as a kid, but a life that meant something. He helped people. He made a difference. And through it all, he thought about us. Every letter mentioned us. Memories of home, regret about leaving, hope that maybe someday he'd have the courage to reach out. The last letter was dated March 2020, right as the pandemic started. "Dear Mama, I'm 60 years old now. Hard to believe. I wonder if you're still alive. You'd be 81 if my math is right. I think about you every day. I imagine what it would be like to see you again, to tell you I'm sorry, to tell you about my life. I've been talking to Michael about finding you, reaching out after all these years. He thinks it's a good idea. I'm not sure. What if you don't want to hear from me? What if you hate me for leaving? What if the hurt is too deep? But I'm getting older and I realize time is running out. Maybe it's time to stop being a coward. Maybe it's time to come home, even if it's just to say goodbye. But he never did reach out. COVID hit, and Danny got sick, and he died alone in a Los Angeles hospital with only Michael there to hold his hand. My son died thinking I might hate him, thinking he'd waited too long, thinking he'd destroyed any chance of coming home. Michael stayed with me for 3 hours that day, telling me about Danny's life, about the person he'd become. He showed me photographs of Danny working at the community garden, Danny at his graduation from a counseling certification program, Danny laughing with friends at a barbecue. He told me how Danny had helped dozens of people get clean, how he'd been a mentor and a friend to so many in the recovery community, how he'd turned his life around despite everything. He was a good man, Michael said. He made mistakes, yes. He struggled, yes. But he was kind and generous, and he cared deeply about helping other people. You should be proud of him. I am proud of him, I said through my tears. I've always been proud of him. I just wish he'd known that. I wish he'd come home. Before Michael left, he gave me one more thing, a small metal box. Inside was a photograph of me, the one from my 45th birthday party in 1984. Danny must have taken it with him when he left. The edges were worn from handling, like he'd looked at it thousands of times over the years. On the back, in Danny's handwriting, it said, "Mama, I'm sorry. I love you. Danny." After Michael left, I sat in my armchair holding that photograph and cried harder than I'd cried in 45 years. I cried for the boy who ran away. I cried for the man he became. I cried for all the years we lost. I cried for the phone calls that never happened and the reunion that would never be. I cried for Robert, who died without knowing any of this. I cried for Linda and Bobby, who lost their brother. And I cried for Danny himself, who carried shame and regret for 45 years when all he needed to do was pick up the phone, and I would have told him I loved him, I forgave him, please come home. I called Linda that night. She drove down from Charlotte the next day. We sat together and read through all of Danny's letters. We looked at all the photographs. We cried together. He thought we'd hate him, Linda kept saying. How could he think that? We loved him. We never stopped loving him. Bobby flew in from Atlanta. The 3 of us sat in my living room going through Danny's things, remembering, grieving, trying to make sense of it all. I'm angry at him, Bobby said. I'm angry that he left and never called and let us worry for 45 years. But I'm also just sad. So sad that he's gone, and we never got to see him again. Michael had given me the address of where Danny was buried, a cemetery in Los Angeles, a simple grave marker that Michael had paid for. We decided to go, all 3 of us. In April 2023, we flew to Los Angeles and visited our brother's grave for the first time. Daniel Robert Patterson, 1961-2021. Beloved friend and mentor. That's what the stone said. Not beloved son or beloved brother, because we hadn't been there to claim him, to tell them who he really was. We stood there at his grave, me and Linda and Bobby, and we took turns talking to him, telling him we loved him, telling him we forgave him, telling him we wished he'd come home but we understood why he didn't, telling him about Dad's death, about Linda's kids, about Bobby's career, about all the family news he'd missed, telling him he was missed, he was loved, he was remembered. Linda brought flowers. Bobby brought a photograph of all of us from 1977, the last family picture before Danny left. I brought the photograph from my 45th birthday, the one Danny had kept all those years. We left them all at his grave, markers of a family that never stopped loving him even when he thought we had. We also met with some of Danny's friends from the recovery community. They held a memorial service for him at the community center where he'd worked. About 50 people came, all of them with stories about how Danny had helped them, encouraged them, believed in them when nobody else did. He'd been sober for 28 years when he died. 28 years of helping other people find the strength to get clean and stay clean. 28 years of making a difference in people's lives. A young woman named Sarah stood up and spoke. She said Danny had been her sponsor, had helped her get clean 7 years ago, had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. Danny told me once that he'd hurt his family badly by leaving when he was young, she said. He said it was his biggest regret. But he also said that he tried every day to make up for it by being there for other people, by being the person he should have been for his own family. He was the best man I've ever known. I'm sorry you didn't get to see him again, but I want you to know that he loved you all so much. He talked about you all the time. After the service, several people came up to us and said the same thing. Danny talked about his family constantly. He showed people the photograph of me. He told stories about growing up in Atlanta, about his little brother and sister, about his parents. He kept us in his heart, even though he was too ashamed to reach out. He loved us, even though he never called. It's been over a year now since Michael knocked on my door. Over a year since I found out what happened to my son. Over a year since I learned that Danny was dead, and had been dead for 2 years without me even knowing. The grief is still there, sharp and painful, the knowledge that I'll never see him again in this life, never get to hold him, never get to tell him face to face that I forgive him, and I love him. But there's also a strange sort of peace. For 45 years, I didn't know if Danny was alive or dead. I didn't know if he was happy or suffering. I didn't know if he thought about us, or if he'd forgotten us completely. Now I know. He was alive for most of those years, and yes, he struggled, but he also triumphed. He overcame his addiction. He built a meaningful life. He helped people. He thought about us every single day. He loved us even though he couldn't come home. I've created a photo album combining pictures from Danny's childhood with pictures from his life in Los Angeles, pictures of the boy he was alongside, pictures of the man he became. I've framed some of his letters and hung them on my walls. I want to remember him completely, all of him, not just the 17-year-old boy who ran away, but the 60-year-old man who died helping others. Linda and Bobby have been processing this in their own ways. Linda says she understands now why Danny left, even though it hurt. She says she felt trapped sometimes too when she was young, wanting to escape, wanting something different. She doesn't know if she would have had the courage to actually leave like Danny did, but she understands the impulse. Bobby is still angry sometimes, but he's also proud. Proud that his big brother turned his life around, proud that he helped so many people, proud that he didn't give up even when things were hard. We've stayed in touch with Michael and with some of Danny's friends in Los Angeles. They've become part of our extended family in a way, these people who knew Danny when we couldn't, who were there for him when we weren't. Sarah, the young woman Danny sponsored, sends me emails sometimes telling me stories about Danny, funny things he said, or wise advice he gave. It helps to hear these stories, to fill in the gaps of those 45 missing years. I think a lot about that last letter Danny wrote in March 2020, where he said he was thinking about reaching out, about coming home. If COVID hadn't happened, would he have done it? Would he have called or written or shown up at my door? We were so close to a reunion, just months away perhaps, and then he got sick and died and the chance was gone forever. It's hard not to feel angry about that, about the timing, about how close we were to having him back. But Michael told me something that helps. He said that Danny died peacefully, that in his last days when he was in the hospital and knew he probably wasn't going to make it, he talked about his family. He told Michael about his childhood, about his mother who made the best cornbread, about his father who taught him to throw a baseball, about his little sister who followed him everywhere, about his little brother who looked up to him. He told Michael to find me, to give me the letters and photographs, to tell me he was sorry and he loved me. His last thoughts were of home, of us, of the family he'd left behind, but never forgotten. And you know, my dears, I've learned something through all of this. I've learned that love doesn't end just because someone leaves. I've learned that family bonds can survive decades of silence and separation. I've learned that it's never too late to forgive, even if the person you're forgiving is already gone. I've learned that shame and fear can keep people trapped more effectively than any prison, and that sometimes the people we love make choices we don't understand, but that doesn't mean we stop loving them. Most importantly, I've learned that Danny's story didn't end when he left Atlanta in 1978. It continued for 43 more years. He had a whole life full of struggles and victories, pain and joy, mistakes and redemption. He wasn't just the boy who ran away. He was a man who fell and got back up, who hit bottom and climbed back out, who used his own suffering to help other people avoid the same mistakes. He was someone's mentor, someone's sponsor, someone's friend. He mattered to a lot of people. He made a difference in the world. I wish he'd come home. I wish I'd gotten to see him one more time, to hold him, to tell him everything was forgiven, to introduce him to his nieces and nephews, to show him that his family still loved him and wanted him in their lives. But that didn't happen, and I have to make peace with that. I have to accept that some stories don't end the way we want them to, but that doesn't make them any less meaningful. I keep Danny's photograph on my bedside table now, the one from when he was about 50, where he's wearing glasses and smiling slightly. He looks like Robert in that picture. Same eyes, same expression. Every night before I go to sleep, I say goodnight to him. Every morning when I wake up, I say good morning. It's silly maybe, but it makes me feel like he's still here somehow, still part of my life, even though he's gone. Linda made copies of all the letters and photographs for herself and Bobby. We all wanted to have pieces of Danny's story, tangible proof that he existed, that he lived, that he mattered. Bobby framed the last family picture from 1977 and hung it in his living room. He says his daughters ask about Uncle Danny sometimes, and he tells them the truth, that Danny made a mistake by leaving, but he was a good man who helped a lot of people and that the family loved him very much. I've thought about writing a letter to Danny, even though he's gone. Michael says some people find it helpful to write down everything they wish they'd said, everything they want the person to know. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll write him a letter telling him about the last 45 years, about how we never gave up looking for him, about how much we missed him, about how proud I am of the man he became despite his struggles. Maybe I'll tell him about his dad's death, about his sister's family, about his brother's career. Maybe I'll tell him all the family news he missed, and maybe I'll end it by saying the thing I most wish I could have said to his face. I love you, Danny. I forgive you. Welcome home. The community center in Los Angeles where Danny worked has established a scholarship in his name for people in recovery who want to get training as peer counselors. Michael set it up with some of Danny's friends, and Linda and Bobby and I all contributed. It seems like a fitting memorial, helping other people the way Danny helped people, keeping his legacy alive. Every year, the scholarship helps 2 or 3 people get the training they need to become counselors and mentors. Danny would have loved that, knowing that his story is still helping people even after he's gone. I'm 83 years old now. I don't know how much time I have left. Some days my health is good, some days not so much, but I'm at peace in a way I haven't been for 45 years. I know what happened to my son. I know he lived a full life, that he struggled but he overcame, that he loved us even from far away. I know where he's buried. I know his story. And I know that when my time comes and I close my eyes for the last time, I'll see him again. Not the broken, ashamed man who couldn't come home, but Danny as he really was underneath all that pain and fear. My son, my beautiful boy, finally free of all the shame and regret that kept him away. So that's my story, my beautiful souls. The story of losing my son for 45 years and finding him again through a stranger who kept a promise. It's not a happy story exactly, because there's no happy ending where Danny comes home and we all live happily ever after. But it's a real story, and it's my story, and it's taught me more about love and forgiveness and family than I ever thought possible. I want to ask you something, my dears. Have you ever lost someone and not known where they were or if they were okay? Have you ever had someone disappear from your life and spent years wondering and worrying? Have you ever gotten an answer to a question you'd been asking for decades, even if the answer wasn't what you hoped for? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories helped me feel less alone. And if this story touched your heart in any way, if it made you think or feel or remember something important, please hit that like button. Subscribe to Grandma's Touching Stories so you never miss another real story from real grandmothers. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes we all need to know that love survives even when people don't, that forgiveness is possible even when it's too late for reunion, and that family bonds can stretch across decades and miles and still remain unbroken. Thank you for listening to this old woman's story. Thank you for sitting with me through all this pain and searching and eventual bittersweet resolution. Thank you for not judging Danny too harshly for leaving, or judging me for never giving up hope. Thank you for understanding that life is complicated and people are flawed, and sometimes the best we can do is love each other through the mistakes and the distance and the time. A big hug from this grandmother who learned that hope can survive 45 years of silence, that love doesn't require proximity to remain true, and that sometimes the answers we finally get aren't the ones we wanted, but they're the ones we needed. I want to tell you about something that happened last month. I was going through some old boxes, things I'd brought from Atlanta all those years ago, and I found something I'd completely forgotten about. It was a Mother's Day card that Danny had made for me when he was 9 years old. The construction paper was faded and yellowed, the crayon drawing barely visible, but the words inside were clear. Dear Mama, you are the best mom in the whole world. I love you to the moon and back. Love, Danny. He'd drawn a picture of the two of us holding hands, both of us with enormous smiles on our faces. I sat there on my living room floor holding that card and crying, but they weren't entirely sad tears. They were tears of gratitude that I'd had him at all, even if only for 17 years. Tears of joy that somewhere in Los Angeles he'd kept my photograph and thought of me. Tears of relief that the story finally had an ending, even if it wasn't the ending I'd prayed for. And tears of peace, knowing that the love we shared when he was young, that love was real, and it lasted his whole life even though we were apart. Michael calls me sometimes to check on me, to see how I'm doing. He's become a friend, this man who was there for my son when I couldn't be. Last time we talked, he told me something that has stayed with me. He said that in all his years of social work, he'd never met anyone who carried family guilt the way Danny did. He wanted to come home, Michael said. But he'd built this story in his head where you all hated him, where he'd done too much damage to ever be forgiven. I tried to tell him that wasn't true, that families forgive, that it's never too late, but he couldn't believe it. The shame was too deep. That's the part that hurts the most, I think. Knowing that Danny spent 45 years believing he couldn't come home, believing we wouldn't want him, when the truth was we would have welcomed him with open arms no matter what. If he'd called from that shelter in 1992 when he was at his lowest, I would have been on the next plane to Los Angeles. If he'd shown up at my door in Miami at 3 in the morning, I would have pulled him inside and never let him go. There was nothing he could have done, no mistake he could have made, that would have made me stop loving him or stop wanting him in my life. But he didn't know that. And that's the tragedy of shame, isn't it? It lies to us. It tells us we're too broken to be loved, too damaged to come home, too far gone to be forgiven. And we believe those lies because they feel true in the moment. Danny believed he'd gone too far, fallen too low, destroyed any chance of redemption. He was wrong, but he believed it, and that belief kept him away until it was too late. If I could give any advice to anyone watching this, anyone who's estranged from their family, anyone who thinks they've made too many mistakes to go home, it would be this: call. Just pick up the phone and call. You might be surprised by the response. Your family might be angry at first, yes, but underneath that anger is probably love and relief and joy that you're alive and reaching out. Don't let shame keep you away. Don't let fear steal years that you could spend with the people who love you. Don't make the same mistake Danny made. And if you're on the other side, if you're the parent or sibling or spouse of someone who left, someone who disappeared, someone who cut off contact, keep the door open. Keep the light on. Keep hoping. Let them know through whatever channels you can that they're welcome home, that they're forgiven, that you love them no matter what. Because you never know when they might be standing on the other side of that door, wanting to knock, but too afraid to try. I've started volunteering at a local organization here in Miami that helps families of missing persons. I share my story with other parents who are going through what I went through. That terrible not knowing, that endless waiting and hoping and fearing. I can't give them the answers they want because every case is different, but I can sit with them in their pain and tell them they're not alone. I can tell them that hope is not foolish, that continuing to search is not crazy, that love that persists through silence and distance is the truest kind of love there is. Some of the families I've met have been searching for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. One woman has been looking for her daughter for 32 years. Every time I meet with these families, I think about the 45 years I searched for Danny, and I understand their pain in a way that maybe others can't. I know what it's like to jump every time the phone rings. I know what it's like to see someone on the street who looks like your missing loved one and feel your heart stop. I know what it's like to go to bed every night praying for a miracle and waking up every morning to continued silence. But I also know something else now. I know that sometimes the miracle comes in a different form than you expected. I prayed for 45 years that Danny would walk through my door, that I'd get to hold him again, that we'd have a reunion like you see in movies. That miracle didn't happen. But I did get a miracle. I got to know what happened to him. I got to read his words and see his photographs and learn about the life he lived. I got to meet people who loved him and were helped by him. I got to visit his grave and tell him goodbye. I got closure after 45 years of questions. That's its own kind of miracle, even if it's not the one I wanted. Linda came to visit last week. We spent the afternoon going through Danny's letters again, reading them out loud to each other. We laughed at some of them, the ones where Danny described his early days in Los Angeles, his optimism and naivety, his dreams of becoming an actor. We cried over others, the ones where you could feel his desperation and pain coming through the words. And we marveled at the later ones, where you could see his transformation, his recovery, his growth into a man who used his struggles to help others. I wish I'd known him as an adult, Linda said. I wish I'd gotten to see who he became instead of just remembering the teenage brother I lost. I told her what I've been telling myself. We did know him in a way. Through these letters, through Michael's stories, through the testimonies of the people he helped, we know him better now than we might have if he'd come home and we'd only seen the surface. We know his depths. We know his struggles. We know the full arc of his story from beginning to end. Bobby has started writing letters to Danny too, even though Danny's gone. He told me it helps him process everything, to write down what he wishes he'd said, what he wants Danny to know. He's writing about their childhood, about the times they played baseball in the backyard, about how Bobby always looked up to his big brother. He's writing about his own life, his career as a firefighter, his daughters, the moments he wished Danny had been there for. He's writing all the things he would have said if they'd had that reunion that never happened. I think that's a beautiful thing, finding ways to maintain connection even across the barrier of death. Danny might not be here to read these letters, but writing them matters. It helps us remember, helps us grieve, helps us process this complicated mixture of love and loss and belated understanding. The support group I attend for families of missing persons has been invaluable. There are about 15 of us who meet twice a month at a community center in downtown Miami. Everyone has a different story, but the pain is universal. Parents missing children, children missing parents, siblings searching for each other. Some have been searching for a few years, others for decades. Some have leads they're following, others have hit dead ends. But we all understand each other in a way that the rest of the world can't. When I first shared my story with the group, about how I searched for 45 years and finally got answers, but not the reunion I wanted, there was a long silence. Then a woman named Patricia spoke up. She's been searching for her son for 17 years. I don't know if I want to hear that, she said. I don't know if I can handle the thought that I might search for decades more, and the answer might be that he's gone. I understood her fear, but I told her what I believe to be true. Not knowing is its own kind of torture, I said. Yes, finding out Danny was dead was devastating, but it was also a relief to finally know, to finally have answers, to finally be able to grieve properly instead of being stuck in this limbo of not knowing. Whatever the answer is for your son, knowing is better than this endless uncertainty. She thought about that for a while, then nodded. You're probably right, she said. I just hope I get my answer before I'm too old to hear it. I hope she does too. I hope everyone in that room gets their answers, whatever those answers might be. Because the not knowing is the cruelest part. I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness lately. I forgave Danny years ago for leaving, even before I knew what happened to him. I forgave him because holding on to anger was exhausting, and because I loved him more than I was hurt by him. But I've realized recently that I also need to forgive myself. For years, I tortured myself with questions. What did I do wrong? How did I fail as a mother that my son felt he had to run away? What signs did I miss? How could I have prevented this? But the truth is, I didn't do anything wrong. I was a good mother. I loved my children and provided for them and did my best. Danny left because he was 17 and searching for something he thought he could only find somewhere else. That's not a failure of parenting. That's just life, just the reality that sometimes our children make choices we don't understand and wouldn't choose for them. And we have to let them live their own lives, even when it hurts us. I've also forgiven Robert, which might seem strange since he's been gone for 20 years, but I carried some resentment toward him for how he handled Danny's disappearance, how his grief turned to anger, how he said things about Danny that he didn't mean but that hurt me to hear. I understand now that he was just hurting, that anger was his way of coping with unbearable pain. He loved Danny just as much as I did. He just showed it differently. The grief counselor I've been seeing says that forgiveness is not about forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about releasing the hold that resentment has on your heart. It's about choosing peace over bitterness. It's about deciding that you won't let past hurts poison your present and future. I'm still working on that. Some days are easier than others, but I'm trying. Next month, I'm flying back to Los Angeles with Linda and Bobby. We're going to visit Danny's grave again, and we're also going to attend the annual memorial event that the community center holds for all the people they've lost over the years. They asked if one of us would speak about Danny, share his story with the current residents and clients. Bobby volunteered. He says he wants to tell them about the brother he remembers, the boy who taught him to ride a bike and throw a curveball, so they know Danny was more than just a counselor or mentor. He was someone's son and someone's brother, someone who was loved his whole life even when he was far away. We're also planning to scatter some of Robert's ashes near Danny's grave. We kept some of Robert's ashes when he died, not sure what to do with them. Now it feels right to leave them there in Los Angeles, to reunite father and son in death, even though they never got that chance in life. I like to imagine them together now somehow. Robert finally able to tell Danny that he loves him and forgives him. Danny finally able to hear those words he needed so desperately. I got a letter last week from Sarah, the young woman Danny sponsored in recovery. She's getting married next month and wanted me to know. She said that Danny would have walked her down the aisle if he were alive, because he was like a father to her, the father she never had. She asked if I would consider coming to her wedding, standing in for Danny in some way. I told her I'd be honored. So next month we'll be busy. Los Angeles for the memorial event, then to San Francisco for Sarah's wedding. At 83, I don't travel as much as I used to, but this feels important. These are Danny's people, his chosen family, and they've become my family too. It's strange how life works out sometimes. I spent 45 years searching for my son, feeling like there was this enormous hole in my life where he should have been. And now, even though Danny is gone and I never got that reunion, I feel more connected to him than I have since he left. I know him better now than I did when he was 17. I understand him better. I see the full picture of his life, not just the part I was present for. And through his friends and the people he helped, I've gained a whole extended family I never knew I had. Michael sent me a video last month. It was from a memorial service they held at the community center on what would have been Danny's 63rd birthday. About 30 people showed up, all of them telling stories about Danny, about how he'd helped them, what he'd meant to them. One man said Danny had literally saved his life by convincing him to go to rehab. A woman said Danny had been the only person who believed she could get clean when she didn't believe it herself. Another man said Danny had helped him reconnect with his own estranged family, had encouraged him to make that phone call he was too scared to make. Watching that video, seeing all these people whose lives Danny had touched, I felt this overwhelming sense of pride. Yes, Danny made mistakes. Yes, he hurt us by leaving and by staying away. Yes, there were years of struggle and pain. But he also did so much good. He helped so many people. He made a real difference in the world. His life mattered. His life had meaning and purpose. And that's something, isn't it? That's something important. I keep wondering what Danny would think if he could see how things turned out. If he could see that we finally know his story, that we've met his friends, that we're continuing his legacy through the scholarship, would he be relieved that we don't hate him? Would he be happy that we're at peace? Would he regret not reaching out sooner? I'll never know the answers to those questions, but I like to think he'd be glad that the truth finally came out, glad that his family knows what became of him, glad that his story is being told. There's a Jewish saying that Michael shared with me. To save one life is to save the world entire. Danny saved a lot of lives through his work in recovery. He saved Sarah and countless others like her. In doing so, he also saved the lives of the people who love them, the families who got their loved ones back because Danny helped them get clean. The ripple effects of his work spread far beyond what any of us can measure. That's his legacy. That's what he left behind. Not just pain and loss, but also hope and healing and second chances. I think about the parallel between Danny's story and my own. He spent 45 years carrying shame and guilt, believing he couldn't come home. I spent 45 years carrying grief and questions, not knowing where he was or if he was okay. Both of us were trapped in our own ways by that August morning in 1978 when Danny left. Both of us were defined by that absence, that empty space, that unanswered question. And then Michael showed up at my door with that envelope, and suddenly both of our stories could move forward. Danny's story could be told and remembered. My story could finally have resolution. Sometimes I wonder what I would say to Danny if I could talk to him one more time. I've thought about this a lot. I'd tell him I'm proud of him, first of all. Proud of how he overcame his addiction. Proud of the work he did. Proud of the man he became. I'd tell him I forgive him for leaving and I understand why he did it, even if I wish things had been different. I'd tell him I never stopped loving him, not for one single day in 45 years. I'd tell him about his nieces and nephews, about his brother's life, about his sister's family. I'd tell him about his father's death and how much Robert loved him despite the angry words. I'd tell him all the family news he missed, all the birthdays and holidays and ordinary days. And then I'd tell him the most important thing: welcome home. Even if it's too late, even if you're already gone, welcome home. You're remembered, you're loved, you're forgiven. Welcome home. But since I can't say those things to Danny directly, I say them into the air and hope somehow, somewhere, he knows. I say them when I visit his grave. I say them when I look at his photographs. I say them when I read his letters. I say them now, to all of you watching this. Danny, wherever you are, I want you to know, you're forgiven, you're loved. Welcome home. I've started writing down memories of Danny from before he left, trying to capture the boy he was so that those memories don't fade completely as I get older. I write about the time he was 8 and brought home a stray dog, begging us to keep it. We couldn't because our landlord didn't allow pets, and Danny cried for days. I write about his first day of high school, how nervous he was, how I made his favorite breakfast to calm him down. I write about the time he stayed up all night helping Linda with her science project because she'd procrastinated and it was due the next day. I write about his laugh, his smile, the way he'd furrow his brow when he was thinking hard about something. These memories are precious to me now. They're all I have of those 17 years when Danny was mine, when he was home, when I could hold him and talk to him and know he was safe. The 45 years he was gone, I didn't get to make new memories with him. But I have these old ones, and I'm writing them all down so that Linda and Bobby can have them too, so that Danny's nieces and nephews can know what their uncle was like as a boy, so that someday when I'm gone, the Danny who existed before 1978 won't be forgotten. I've also been compiling all of Danny's letters and photographs into a book, not to publish or anything like that, just for our family. I want Bobby's daughters to be able to read their uncle's words, to see his photographs, to understand the full story. I want Linda's children to know him. I want future generations of our family to remember Danny, not as a mystery or a tragedy or a cautioned tale, but as a real person with depth and complexity. Someone who struggled and fell and got back up. Someone who made mistakes but also made amends in his own way. The book is almost finished. I've included everything: the letters, the photographs, Michael's testimony about Danny's life in Los Angeles, testimonies from the people Danny helped, memories from Linda and Bobby and me about Danny's childhood. It's a complete picture of a life from beginning to end. It's heavy with both pain and redemption. It's honest about the struggles without glossing over them, but it's also honest about the triumphs. It's the story of Danny as he really was, complicated and human and ultimately doing his best with what he had. Linda wants to make copies for each of her children. Bobby wants one for each of his daughters, and I'm keeping the original here with me, so that anytime I want to, I can open it and see my son's life laid out before me, complete and known and finished. There's comfort in that completeness, in knowing the whole story instead of being forever stuck at August 1978, forever wondering what came next. My health hasn't been great lately. I have good days and bad days, which I suppose is normal at 83. The doctor says my heart is getting weaker, that I should be prepared for the possibility that I don't have a lot of time left. That should scare me, but it doesn't. I've lived a long life. I've loved and been loved. I've raised 3 children, even if one of them only lived with me for 17 years. I've seen my grandchildren grow up. I've traveled and laughed and cried and survived things I didn't think I could survive. And most importantly, I finally know what happened to Danny. I finally have my answers. I can die in peace, knowing his story, knowing he lived a full life, even if much of it was lived far away from me. When my time comes, I imagine I'll see Danny again. Not the worn-out 60-year-old man in the later photographs, and not the frightened 17-year-old boy who ran away. I imagine I'll see him as he was in his best moments, healthy and happy, and free of all the shame and regret that kept him away. I imagine we'll finally have that conversation, the one where I tell him everything I wanted to say, and he tells me everything he couldn't say in life. I imagine we'll hold each other and cry, and then we'll be okay. We'll be together. We'll be family again, without all the barriers that separated us in life. Until then, I'm living each day as it comes. I'm spending time with Linda and Bobby and my grandchildren. I'm volunteering with the families of missing persons, offering whatever comfort and wisdom I can. I'm attending Sarah's wedding and being part of Danny's other family. I'm writing these memories and compiling this book. I'm living my life fully, not in spite of the 45 years of searching and the belated answers, but somehow because of them. The pain has taught me things. The searching has made me stronger. The eventual truth, hard as it was, has set me free. So that's my story, my beautiful souls, all of it. All of I, the boy who ran away, the mother who never stopped searching, the 45 years of questions, the stranger who brought answers, and the bittersweet resolution that came too late for reunion, but just in time for understanding. It's not a perfect story. It doesn't have a fairy tale ending, but it's real and it's mine, and I'm sharing it with you today in the hope that maybe it will help someone. Maybe there's someone watching who has a missing loved one, and my story will give you hope that answers will come eventually. Maybe there's someone who ran away years ago and is too ashamed to go home, and my story will give you courage to reach out because I promise you, your family loves you more than you can imagine. Maybe there's someone who's carrying guilt about something they did long ago, and my story will help you understand that forgiveness is possible even when we think it's too late. Maybe there's someone who needs to hear that love survives distance and time and death itself, that the bonds we forge with the people we love can never truly be broken. Whatever your reason for watching, whatever brought you to my story, I hope you found something here that resonates with you. I hope you'll remember that hope is not foolish, that love is never wasted, that forgiveness heals both the forgiver and the forgiven, and that it's never too late to reach out to someone you've lost touch with. Life is short. Time is precious. Don't let shame or fear steal the relationships that matter most. Thank you for listening to this old woman pour out her heart. Thank you for sitting with me through this long, winding story of loss and searching and eventual bittersweet closure. Thank you for not judging Danny too harshly or me for my years of hope that some might call foolish. Thank you for understanding that families are complicated and love is messy, and sometimes the best we can do is keep trying, keep hoping, keep loving, even when it hurts. If this story touched you, please hit that like button. Subscribe to Grandma's Touching Stories so you never miss another real story from real grandmothers. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, if there's someone in your life you've been meaning to call, someone you've lost touch with, someone you need to forgive or ask forgiveness from, do it today. Don't wait. Don't let another 45 years go by. Pick up the phone, write the letter, knock on the door, because you never know how much time you have, and you don't want to spend your last years wondering what if. A big hug from this grandmother who searched for 45 years and finally found peace, who learned that answers matter even when they're not the answers we wanted, and who knows with absolute certainty that love is stronger than distance, stronger than time, stronger even than death itself. Until next time, my beautiful souls, keep loving, keep hoping, keep reaching out to the people who matter, And remember, you're never too far gone to come home, and it's never too late to forgive. God bless you all, wherever you are.